He gives an old lady the lift in the middle of the road, but when she says his name, the taxi driver can't believe who she is. Isaac woke up to his alarm at 6 a.m. as usual. He stretched and sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, trying to shake off the sleepiness. The sunlight was beginning to come through the window, illuminating the room and announcing a new day. Dragging himself out of bed, he walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. As the hot water poured over his body, he thought about the many appointments he had and tried to mentally prepare himself for another day of work. After showering, Isaac put on a clean shirt and jeans, as well as a vest with the logo of the cab company he worked for. He looked in the mirror, straightened his hair, and made a funny face, trying to lift his spirits. "Isaac, breakfast is ready," his father shouted from the kitchen, his voice a little colder than usual. "Coming, Dad," he replied as he grabbed his cell phone and wallet. In the kitchen, the table was set with a simple but tasty breakfast: fresh toast with butter, scrambled eggs, bacon, and a hot cup of coffee. The atmosphere was tense, as the man and his father had argued the night before over a disagreement. He sat down at the table, avoiding eye contact with the old man, and began to eat, savoring each bite in silence. The elderly man, noticing his son's discomfort, tried to start a conversation. "How's your agenda for today, son?" he asked, as he poured some more coffee into Isaac's cup. "Pretty full, Dad. I've got some passengers already booked and I'm going to try to get some extra rides through the app," explained the taxi driver, sipping his coffee without looking at his father. As soon as he'd finished eating, the man got up, still a little miffed. But before he left for work, his father said, "Son, I'm sorry about yesterday. You know I'm only looking out for you." "It's okay, Dad," said the son. "We'll talk when I get back, okay? I have to go," and walked to his car parked in front of his house. He got into his car and with a heavy heart began to drive through the city streets with the thought of the argument with his father, who was his best friend, weighing heavily on his mind. The sun was shining on the horizon, obstructing his vision, and everything around him irritated him at that moment. But he knew that even though he was facing difficult times at home, he needed to concentrate on his work and resolve family issues when he returned. Isaac was a 35-year-old taxi driver who lived with his father, Joseph, who suffered from a chronic illness called multiple sclerosis. The condition affected his central nervous system, causing fatigue and pain, and even making it difficult to move. To help his father, he worked long hours and did his best to cover the medical expenses and ensure that Joseph received the best treatment. However, the enormous effort he put in to support the household and look after his father was taking its toll. He neglected his own health and as a result suffered from insomnia, constant headaches due to stress, and his immune system was weaker by the day. Despite the difficulties, Isaac was determined to continue working, believing he had no other option. The night before, the little man and his son had a heated argument about his health. Joseph was worried about his well-being and wanted him to quit his job at the cab company as it was affecting his health, his life, and his energy. "Dad, I can't just quit my job. It's our only source of income and I need to look after you," Isaac argued, while feeling exhausted and frustrated. "Son, I know you're doing the best you can, but your health is important too. You won't be able to look after me if you're ill." The old man tried to make him understand that he was worried. "I'm fine, Dad. I just need to adapt to this routine. Don't worry about me," replied the taxi driver, even though he knew his body was crying out for a rest. Joseph sighed, knowing that he wouldn't be able to convince his son at that moment. The discussion ended without a definitive solution, leaving a heavy atmosphere between the two. The next day, over breakfast, the tension between them was still palpable. The taxi driver felt guilty for worrying his old man, but believed he had no choice but to keep working hard. The old man, on the other hand, was distressed to see his son wearing himself out day after day. As he drove through the city streets, Isaac couldn't help thinking about the matter and wondered if he was really doing the right thing. "But I really can't quit this job. How am I going to pay for everything?" he thought. "If only I had another chance in life or some miracle happened, maybe things would be different and my father wouldn't be suffering like this now." The hours passed, and the man picked up passengers and faced the city's chaotic traffic. With each ride, the taxi driver felt fatigue and stress building up in his body, but he tried to ignore them and move on. After all, every passenger he took meant more money to help his father. The hours passed and it was late at night when he finished his workday. Isaac had decided to work overtime that day, taking customers up and down the street hoping to earn a few extra bucks to help out at home. He was exhausted, his body was sore, and his mind was tired after a long, hard day at work. The sky began to darken even more, covering the stars with heavy clouds, and a light rain began to fall, turning into a persistent drizzle. The city streets were increasingly empty, and the streetlights reflected off the wet asphalt, creating a melancholy atmosphere. It was then that the cab driver, already on his way home, spotted an old lady on the side of the road, looking for a cab. She appeared to be about 70 years old, with gray hair tied up in a bun, with a flowered dress, and a knitted cardigan. Her face expressed concern and tiredness, while she held a small umbrella that barely protected her slender body from the raindrops. Despite his tiredness and his desire to call it a day, Isaac couldn't ignore the old lady's situation, so he stopped the car next to her and lowered the window. "Good evening, ma'am. Need a lift?" he asked, trying to disguise the tiredness in his voice. The old lady looked at the man with relief and gratitude. "Oh, thank you so much, young man. I didn't know if I'd be able to find anyone at this hour," she said as she got into the car. As soon as she had settled into the back seat, the taxi driver turned on the heater and asked her where she would like to go. She gave him the address and thanked him again, with a tired smile on her face. "It was nothing, ma'am. It's late and it's raining. I couldn't leave you on the street like this," he replied kindly. During the ride, the old lady struck up a conversation with Isaac. She talked about the weather, the city, and even the difficulty of finding a cab at that time. The taxi driver, despite his tiredness, listened attentively and responded whenever he could, trying to be polite and courteous. The conversation eventually led to more personal matters. She shared stories from her life, talking about her dreams and her adventures when she was younger. She talked about the journey she had made and how the world had changed since then. "Oh, young man, I've lived through a lot, you know. I remember a trip I took with my husband to Europe in the 70s. We visited so many incredible places," she said, her eyes sparkling as she recalled the happy times. Isaac listened attentively, amazed at the old lady's experiences. Then, when she asked why he was working so late, he briefly mentioned his father and his concern about his illness. "You know, ma'am, I work hard to look after him. He has multiple sclerosis and needs professional help, so we have a lot of medical expenses. So, sometimes I work overtime, like today," he shared with a tired sigh. The elderly woman listened to his story and replied with understanding and affection. "You're a dedicated son, and I'm sure your father knows that. It's important to take care of those you love, but don't forget to take care of yourself, too," she advised with a worried look on her face. Isaac thanked her for her words and promised to try to find a balance in his life. The empathy between the two grew with every word they exchanged, and the taxi driver was amazed at the energy the old lady emanated, even in such a stressful situation. So as the car drove through the dark and damp streets, the two continued to talk. Then, at a certain point, they passed in front of a park, and the old lady mentioned that she used to take her grandchildren there to play. Coincidentally, that park was the same one the man used to go to as a child, and this awoke in him a feeling of familiarity with her. "I've been to that park too, ma'am. I used to play there when I was a child," he commented, trying to understand the origin of this unexpected connection. The old lady smiled and continued, "It's a wonderful place full of good memories. I used to go there with my grandchildren whenever I could." As the conversation progressed, Isaac began to feel a strange feeling of déjà vu. He looked at her from the rear-view mirror and couldn't get it out of his head that she was no stranger to him. The old woman talked about things and places that seemed vaguely familiar to him, as if he had crossed her path at some point in his life. "Did I ever give you a lift in my 10 years as a taxi driver?" he thought silently. The mystery was growing in the man's mind, making him restless and curious. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story. Everything she said about her life, such as things she liked to do, places she liked to visit, and things she believed in, gave him a strange feeling that he had already seen or lived those things. Besides, it was as if she knew about his personality and his dreams. He was starting to get suspicious. Then the old lady, sensing the taxi driver's discomfort, looked at him with an enigmatic look and said, "Isaac, I need to tell you something." When he heard her say his name, he became even more frightened. The man hadn't said his name throughout the conversation, so how did she know? How do you know my name?" he asked, with a lump in his throat. The old woman sighed and replied, "I know this may sound strange, but there's a connection between us that goes beyond your imagination, Isaac. The taxi driver looked at the lady, confused and anxious. He tried to remember her in any way he could, or anything that might help him understand where he had seen this woman before. The lady continued, her voice soft and careful. I want you to try to remember, Isaac. Think back to your childhood, to the people who were around you. I was there, but you were so small that you might not remember. He tried to concentrate for a moment, reliving his childhood memories. Blurred images flashed through his mind, but nothing seemed to fit. I can't remember, ma'am. Please tell me. Who are you? He begged, increasingly intrigued. She hesitated for a moment before answering. She knew the revelation would come as a shock to him, and she didn't want to cause any more confusion. However, it was time to tell him the truth. My dear, I'm your grandmother, Grace, she said, her eyes watering. The man was stunned, not knowing how to react. The grandmother he knew had died when he was still a child, and he only knew her stories through the memories shared by his father. There was no way that woman was telling the truth. That's impossible. My grandmother died when I was a child. What are you trying to do here? Isaac asked, incredulous and suspicious. The old lady looked at him with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She knew it would be difficult for the man to accept the reality, but she was determined to make him understand. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm your grandmother, Isaac. I can prove it, she said, as she reached into her bag for something. The taxi driver watched, still skeptical, as she took out a small metal box. She carefully opened it and showed him a faded photograph of a woman who looked very much like her, standing next to a smiling child. Himself, as a child. I took this photo when you were only 4 years old, my dear, explained the grandmother with a caring look on her face. I never wanted to be apart from you, but circumstances made it difficult for me. The man, still driving, looked at the photograph, feeling a lump in his throat. If that woman really was his grandmother, how could she be there, alive and healthy when everyone believed she had died? Was I at your funeral? That can't be real. I must be delirious. He was stunned. The old woman looked him in the eye and with a serious expression explained, the truth is, my grandson, that I can't stay on this worldly plane for long. I came here to give you an important message. Isaac, still trying to absorb everything that was happening, listened attentively. She continued, you need to take better care of your health and the life you lead, not just for yourself, but also for your father. The effort you're making is praiseworthy, but it can't go on like this. Your father needs you by his side and not waiting alone all day while you completely give up on yourself. He emotionally replied, but I can't just quit my job, Grandma. I'm a taxi driver, and that's how I support our family. And my father, I don't know how I can help with his illness. There's nothing I can do. I get so little to pay for the treatment, and that's why I can't just quit. My health can wait, but his health can't. The old woman put her hand on his shoulder and said, I understand, my son, but trust me when I say that there are other ways of taking care of your father. You need to find a balance in your life and learn to look after yourself too. Before Isaac could reply, they arrived at the address the old lady had asked for. He looked at the house and suddenly felt a shiver run down his spine. It was the house he had lived in as a child, his grandmother's house, abandoned for years. Why did you bring me here? He asked, incredulous and very frightened. The old woman smiled gently and said, I have many memories here, my grandson. I wanted to remind you of where you came from and of the people who love you. Remember that your father needs you more than ever, and above all, never lose hope. With those words, the lady opened the cab door and walked into the abandoned house, leaving him alone in the car. He didn't know how to process it. He was feeling a mixture of emotions, confusion, longing, sadness. Seeing her enter the house, Isaac decided to face his fears and follow her. I can only be delirious, he said to himself as he got out of the car and ran to the front door with his heart racing. Inside, everything was abandoned and worn by time. The peeling walls and dust-covered floors showed how much the house had been forgotten. Despite the deplorable state of the place, he realized that there were still traces of his past scattered around. Pictures of his grandmother and his father as a child hung on the walls, faded and eaten by moths, but it brought back a flood of long-lost memories. The taxi driver began to explore the house cautiously, feeling a strange feeling of welcome and fear at the same time. He remembered playing there as a child, running through the corridors and hiding in the cupboards. With every step he took, memories surfaced in his mind, making him feel sadness and nostalgia that envelop him. As he passed one of the rooms, Italo found an old photo album. Hey, I was all wet in this picture, he thought, laughing as he saw himself as a child in just his underpants, jumping in the rain puddles. Other photos showed the happy life his family led before his grandmother's death. At that moment, the nostalgia and loss of her hit him hard, and he couldn't stop the tears from streaming down his face. That was enough for him, so he decided to leave. His heart ached, because he didn't want to lose his father, too. He was the only family he had left. But then, as he walked slowly back, trying to assimilate all the emotions that were overtaking him, Isaac stumbled over a loose floorboard. Intrigued, he decided to investigate, and to his surprise, he discovered a box hidden under the boards. "What is this?" Trembling, the taxi driver opened the box and his eyes went wide. No, this can't be real," he said, completely baffled. Inside the box was a gold bar and a significant amount of money. "This is unbelievable," Isaac muttered, still trying to grasp the magnitude of his discovery, with his heart overflowing with gratitude, and realizing that his grandmother's visit really was the miracle he had longed for. He looked up and said, "Thank you, Grandma. I can't thank you enough." That hidden treasure, apparently left by the old lady, would change his and his father's lives forever, giving them the financial stability they so desperately needed. With that money, Isaac could take better care of himself and his family without having to sacrifice his health to work. That day, the taxi driver returned home in a day, still unable to believe what had happened. When he got home, he found Joseph sitting in the living room waiting for him. "Do you believe in miracles?" he asked the elderly man, his eyes full of tears. Isaac then recounted the experience he'd had that night, showing him the box full of gold and money. The man, crying, hugged his son. "This is a miracle. It's a miracle. Your grandmother always took care of us, and now she's taking care of us, even after she's gone." And so, from that day on, the taxi driver and his old man decided to use their inheritance wisely. The man managed to find a balance in his life, taking better care of himself and his father, without the financial pressure that had previously suffocated them. With the money, they were able to pay for better medical treatments and therapies that helped Joseph's health recover. In addition, Italo began to invest in his own education and realized his dream of opening a taxi cooperative, where he and other drivers could work together, sharing resources and obtaining better working conditions. Their lives changed completely, and the former taxi driver, now an entrepreneur, was finally able to enjoy a more peaceful and happy life. So father and son celebrated this achievement together and never forgot the mysterious night that transformed their lives and led them to a prosperous future full of possibilities. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.